Hi, welcome to another MYD Minute. I'm your host, Leanne Hackman-Carty. Today we're going to talk about the common vulnerabilities that, or common challenges that arise after disaster. And I'll comment specifically on how they impact individuals, businesses, and communities. So one of the first common challenges that are faced is around communication. Communication is actually hard at the best of times, let alone when a disaster happens. So in the case of communication, you could have a situation where all of your infrastructure is down. Your internet's down, your phones aren't working, your electricity grid is down for a week, a month, or even longer in the case of something like Puerto Rico. So what do? You got to think in advance. If my great infrastructure was down, I might have to resort to some basic fundamental ways to communicate. I might have to go door to door. I might have to give my community flyers. I may have to go on radio eventually once it's live, or use ham operators. So thinking about your communications, how you're going to communicate, what messages you're going to give out, that's really critical, because if you can have a plan in place prior to, you're going to be that much better off when this situation happens and you're trying to control rumors and you're trying to get information out in a situation that's less than ideal. Another thing that you got to think about is impact. If you don't have baseline data as to what your business was like prior to the disaster or your community, then it's going to be very difficult to prove what happened as a result. Did your sales go down 10%, 20%, 30%? Your community, what type of infrastructure has been damaged? What was it like before? What is it now? How do you prove those kinds of things? So proving impact is another thing you need to figure out. And the best way to do that is to have good information now so you can benchmark what happened and how the impact has affected you. Thirdly, it's vulnerabilities you didn't know you had. So whether it's an individual, you have a home where you've got a crack in your foundation where water makes its way in, or you've got a few shingles on your roof that are loose, it takes something like a disaster to just point out that vulnerability. So understanding that these vulnerabilities are there, helping mitigate them in advance. If you're next to a coastline, perhaps a surge from the ocean is going to impact you. So how do you mitigate for some of those vulnerabilities that you have? Finally, the one that really concerns me is businesses. How that nobody usually is looking after the needs of businesses. 1 in 4 businesses will probably not reopen after a disaster. That's a significant part of your community. So how do you put stuff in place prior to support them, to help them with resources, getting all of the resources on your website, maybe on a special portal that you enable once a disaster happens? What types of financial instruments do you have access to? Could you have grants for businesses that they don't have to pay back? Could you have things like revolving loan funds or forgivable loans, different government programs that businesses can take advantage of? Because really cash flow is going to be an issue for them. And sometimes providing them just with more money, more loans in particular, isn't always the best solution for them. So finding out ways to support them with grants or free consulting, those kinds of things are important. So in closing, just if you are to understand some of these challenges are very common across the board, think about them. How would you respond to them? How would you be prepared to understand what are your vulnerabilities you need to communicate? If your infrastructure was down, what would you do? Measuring impact, all of those things are important to think about, because in the end, you do want to master your disaster and get out of it better off than how you went into it. So that's your MYD Minute for this episode. And in the interim, stay safe and subscribe to our channel if you want to learn about more things disaster. Thanks again.